views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
To BronxTalk. There is a lot going on in our world and in our nation, but actually also in the state of New York. They've started a new session in Albany, and as we have done literally every year since we've been on the air more than 26 years ago, at the beginning of the year, we try to bring in our elected representatives and have them talk a little bit about what they're doing. So we'll have a representative from the Senate and one from the Assembly this evening. We'll start off with Senator Gustavo Rivera of the 33rd Senatorial District. I'll just list the neighborhoods. If you don't know what he covers, it's the Bronx neighborhoods of Kingsbridge Heights, Kingsbridge Fordham, University Heights, Van Ness, I'm counting along, Tremont, East Tremont, and parts of Morrisania and Parkchester. My pleasure to welcome back to BronxTalk, Senator Gustavo Rivera. Nice to have you with us.
It is nice to be with you in a day when we no longer have to worry whether the resident of the White House will start a war with Iran because he disliked a tweet. It is so great to be with you.
You know, it's very interesting to me. I mean, you talked about the Twitter thing. I think along with everything else, I think that really has muzzled him. In other words, he doesn't have, especially now that he's not the president. What do you expect from the Biden presidency and the Senate Majority Leader? Let's face it, Chuck Schumer is from New York. There's been a lot of talk that maybe New York State will do well. Let's start there. What do you think?
Competence and will to govern. Because when you had before was a person who sat in that seat, and by the way, I never referred to that person by the title that now President Biden has. Never will. I will never refer to him as a former anything because he is still a con man. He was a con man before, he's a con man now. But what we have is somebody in President Biden who understands what governance is. He cares to govern. He wants to surround himself with people to actually solve people's problems. And so that's the first thing. So you have somebody who is both willing to govern and who's competent and who surrounds himself with competent people. And then you have Chuck Schumer, who as a senior senator for New York, obviously will look out for the interest of New York State. So what I expect is for us to, at least at that level, because we can certainly talk about what's going to happen in the country as a whole, and we should probably get into that at some point. But governmentally speaking, what I expect is for us to have the normal type of debates that we have with Democratic presidents. I remember when Obama, I was supportive of Obama, but I fought him on a lot of issues that I thought he wasn't right on. And that's exactly the same thing that's going to happen with Biden. So I am happy with some of the moves that he's made, kind of the things to some other ones that he's made already, we need to check on. But at least the fact that we can have a conversation about governance and about the fact that we can, debate the types of folks that should be in power in different agencies, et cetera, and not whether the whole democratic experiment is failing. I mean, that's an incredible breath of fresh air. And I would say to everybody, take a second and soak it in to just celebrate for a second, at least that there's back to that level of normalcy.
One of the issues that has been along the way of empowering President Trump is media. And we know about Fox News. There was a story, and I want to ask you if you think there's some truth to it or not. It came out in the New York Post, literally right after or just before the inauguration. They reported that the governor, Cuomo, said he would sue the new president, if he doesn't get $15 billion for New York. Do you believe that is the governor already laying that out? Seems to me he wants the $15 billion, but is he really going to do that?
Governor Cuomo wants to change the subject from the fact that he is scared for some reason to tax the wealthy. The last 9 months of this pandemic have shown us, have struck all New Yorkers, but have struck communities, poor and working class communities across the state worse. The most vulnerable have been hurt by the cuts that he has imposed, by the lack of economic activity. And so there's many of us who have been saying for a long time, we need to tax the wealthy, and the governor has been resisting. So now that we are in 2021, there's many of us who are actually part of a campaign called Invest in Our New York. It is a series of tax proposals on the wealthy, which would raise up to $50 billion in new revenue from the wealthy. But governor doesn't want to talk about that. So the fact that he's saying that he's going to sue the federal government, in my honest opinion, I think it's just him trying to change the subject from the fact that he is not fulfilling his responsibility to New Yorkers by engaging with us in the legislature, both of which the Assembly and the Senate believe we need to tax the wealthy at a higher rate. And he just doesn't want to talk about it.
This leads us right into a dialogue about the supermajority. Is that the kind of issue, which is a large issue, that you think you're going to be able to tackle and maybe move forward, putting more tax on people making over a certain amount of money?
Well, but we'll get back to taxes in a second. Let's talk about the supermajority so that people understand. The reason why we refer to it as a supermajority in the Senate is because with a body of 63, we would require 42 members of the Senate to be able to override a gubernatorial veto. Now we have 43 members in our conference. So if we stick together, we could potentially overturn a veto. It has not happened in a very long time, and we're going to use it sparingly, but I do believe that it is something that we need to consider. Now, as far as the taxes, it is not just taxes on income, which is what's important to understand here. It is taxes on property, if you have a second home, like a second apartment that is not your primary home in the city of Manhattan, and you have a $3 or $4 million apartment that you're in like a week a year. How about we actually tax that at a higher rate? It's called the pied-à-terre tax. How about taxes on investments? But investments, not the type that you or I would make, but the type that millionaires and billionaires would make. So it's not just income. And when the governor talks about the taxes, he says, well, if we tax the income of wealthy individuals that make a certain amount of money, we're not going to be able to cover all of the deficit that we have. And he is correct when he is using his numbers and his calculation. Again, the plan that I'm supportive of to invest in our New York, and people should go and Google invest in our New York, because we have a series of proposals which would give us at least $50 billion in new revenue, 50. And the reason we do that is not only to deal with the cuts that the governor has made, but to really invest in infrastructure, in health, in education, because we need to do those things to be able to come back with any type of strength.
You are the chair of the Senate Health Committee, and obviously health is numero uno on our list right now.
Sí, señor.
Vaccine rollout, obviously it's not gone well.
No, it is not.
Talk about some of the legal issues that you have been legislating about. So let's start here with the rollout. It's been a mess. President Biden unveiled a new plan today on how to do it. What are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing is that there's definitely a lot of responsibility that falls on the federal government, the regime, because I'm not even going to refer to what happened in the last 4 years as an administration. The regime of that person who was there was someone who was caring so much more about himself and his benefit that he forgot that he actually works for people. So there was no plan. For vaccine rollout, there was no such thing. Now, as the president today confirmed, they didn't have anything to work from, so they have to go from scratch. So what I expect, first of all, is for the federal government to utilize the resources that have not been utilized so far to really speed up the production of vaccine, as well as coordinate distribution of it and making sure that it gets to the places that it needs to get to. So that's at the federal level. However, we need to talk about what happened here in the state. And what's happening in the state is that, unfortunately, the governor seems to think that what he needs to do is he needs to establish his own parallel distribution system for vaccinations, as opposed to thinking through what localities like the city of New York, counties, and other localities around the state, they have planned for this. They have actually made plans for this for a long time. How about we do this? How about we figure out what is not working about the plan that's already in place from cities and localities that have thought about this? Departments of health all across the state have thought about this. How about we figure out what's wrong with them and we augment their ability to provide more to be able to distribute the vaccine in a better way. As opposed to that, the governor, what he's been doing is he seems to try to establish a different parallel system so he can claim credit for it. And that is all sorts of wrong. It's certainly a par for the course for what the governor does, but it doesn't solve the problem. And we need to solve the problem, which is how do we get vaccines to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible?
Hopefully there will be, as we move forward, there will be some guidance from the federal government as indicated by President Biden today. Let's talk about this idea of medical debt during the pandemic. The people are being chased around for funds, maybe that for a family member or even for themselves, that they don't have. Talk to me about the Patient Medical Debt Protection Act.
So I'll take a second to just recognize that it was the brainchild of very much of my recently deceased committee director. Her name was Kristen Sinclair. She was an incredibly important part of my team, and she passed away from COVID in late December. She was incredibly important to us and to the state as a whole, and this piece of legislation is a perfect example of it. This was partly her brainchild. The idea here is that patients all across the state of New York, they are embattled with all sorts of debt, medical debt, then it's pursued by hospitals and other healthcare facilities and puts them in situations, the patients in places where they have to declare bankruptcy because of debt that is medical debt, many times in ways that they didn't even know that they were incurring a debt. So what we're doing with this package is a comprehensive package to protect patients from medical debt. It is protecting patients from entities that just want to come and just say to them, like, you just have to pay me the money, regardless of whether you thought that you had to at the beginning or not. We provided the care, we need the money now. We need to protect patients from it. This piece of legislation is a comprehensive piece of legislation that does just that.
And you feel confident it's going to move through?
We're working on it, and I feel that it's one of the things that has been clear to people, certainly all across the state, and in my conference as well. They know because they've had constituents come to them, talking to them about the issues that they've had with medical debt. Matter of fact, there was a report by the Community Service Society, which is the advocacy organization who we're working with very closely on this issue, a report that was put out just a couple of weeks ago that detailed how Northwell Health, which is the largest healthcare provider in the state of New York, was actually going after 2,500 people who incurred medical debt during the crisis, during the pandemic. So we're talking about folks who probably couldn't afford rent and who weren't working, and they were getting sued by this hospital for medical debt. They put out the report, and then Northwell were like, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't pursue that. So they actually ceased and desisted, if you will. But that's the type of thing that all across the state, and certainly all my colleagues feel very strongly about this. So I'm still in conversations with my colleagues. We just started the session. The session is 2 weeks old at this point. I'm looking very, very much forward to pushing this in the rest of the conference, in the rest of the session.
Senator, before we bring Assemblyman Pichardo on, you have two events coming up. I know you want to talk to people about it.
Yes.
One is a tenant homeowner webinar, and the other is a town hall on the vaccine.
Basically, what we want to do is we want to make sure that you continue to be informed during these times. Our offices are still closed physically. We're still in the middle of the pandemic, so we're not open. We're open virtually, though. And so a couple of things that we're doing is we're making sure that we provide information to people about issues that are still impacting them. So we will have some a housing event. We also have a town hall on vaccinations because we want to make sure that we provide correct information. We know that some people might not trust this vaccine. We want to make sure that trust is there. It is necessary for you to get vaccinated. It is safe for you to get vaccinated. We're going to do what we can on our end to make sure that you can have access to it, which is the problem that we talked about earlier. But at the very least, we want to make sure that people are informed about what it is, what it's not, and where they can get it.
Hey, Senator, thank you so much. I do appreciate your time, and certainly as the session goes on, we'll bring you back and we'll keep going. We appreciate it.
Looking forward to it.
So let's welcome on the Assembly member from the 86th New York State Assembly District. It includes some of the same neighborhoods that the Senator covers: University and Morris Heights, Mount Eden, Kingsbridge, Tremont, and Fordham in the Bronx. And so Victor Pichardo, Assemblyman, nice to have you with us.
Gary, it was a pleasure, and Happy New Year, sir. It's nice to see you.
Happy New Year to you. I just heard that you had worked for Senator Schumer, who is now the majority leader of the Senate. So let's start there. What do you expect? Do you expect a little extra consideration for New York State as a result of having a New York senator being the majority leader?
Well, first of all, I'm proud of Chuck. I'm proud of that entire team. And just to simply be affiliated with Schumerland, it's an honor. And I know how hard that team works. I know how hard the majority leader is going to work, not only to deliver for New Yorkers, because he always has, regardless if he was a senator or in leadership, but he will continue to deliver for this country. I think right now, it's nice to have sort of adults in the room. It was a little jarring. I was watching the press briefings earlier, and it wasn't contentious. It was fact-based. It was information-based, and it was refreshing. It was someone said it was aggressively normal, and it's something that I'm looking forward to working with Senator Schumer as well as in this new administration to help deliver for New Yorkers during these difficult times. So I'm happy and I'm ready to work.
What kind of priorities have you set and your colleagues in the Assembly set for the Assembly as you now take on 2021?
Well, first of all, I think the biggest priority is around us. It's dealing and controlling this pandemic, right? Getting the vaccine into New Yorkers' arms as quickly as possible, making sure that we do it in a quick, safe, efficient way. And then also because of the economic aftermath that 2020 brought, 2021, I think is going to be a year of economic justice. Myself, many of my colleagues, as well as I know that Senator Rivera, as well as his House, have been committed in terms of creating a much more progressive taxation system here in New York State. Because again, as we saw, essential workers, they worked, and some of them, unfortunately, some had to lose their homes because they weren't making enough money, and a lot of people who did pretty well during this pandemic, they made more money. So we have to create a much more progressive taxation system, and create a budget that makes sense for all New Yorkers and not for just a certain group of people to thrive and prosper in this economic environment.
Let's talk about jobs. How do you reinvigorate the economy? I realize that equitability in the tax structure is one thing, but how do we really do that? And certainly, as you look at your district, how do you make that happen?
Well, first of all, we have to get people back to work, right? And the way to doing that is getting this virus and this pandemic under control. We have to maintain social distance. We have to keep wearing masks. And we have to get shots into people's arms, right? I think that's once we get that under control and people feel safe to go outside, to go back to work, to interact with people, I think that's going to have a giant impact on the economy. Besides that, I think really we just have to continue to bring more resources into the community and fix the problems that have existed and were exacerbated during the pandemic. And I'm committed to doing that. And I know that my colleagues in the Assembly majority will continue to push and do that. And I look forward to engaging with all parties to have a budget that brings resources into my community.
One of the things that I have had as far as dialogue on this program for many years, especially with many Central and South Bronx communities, is the availability of banks. People who want to open up a business got to go somewhere else where they don't know who they are. Certainly, that's where systemic racism kicks in. I mean, we know about all that. You are now the chair of the banks committee in the Assembly. Talk to me about convincing banks to open up in our neighborhoods. Seems so simple, sure, but it really is a very difficult effort because they look at large numbers, and if they don't see it, they don't understand the need, and they don't understand how we in the Bronx can help them. How do you make it happen?
Well, first of all, I'm grateful for this opportunity that Speaker Hasty entrusted me with this committee. We spoke, we've had this conversation in the past regarding redlining and sort of lack of state and private investment into communities. And it's sort of a self-feeding loop, right? So, because these investments didn't happen in the past, that means that the resources aren't there in the present, which means that what's the point of reinvesting into these communities? I've engaged and will continue to engage with the Department of Financial Services here in the state of New York in my new capacity as the chair of banks in the New York State Assembly. And I think really we need to have a broad conversation on of not only just having banks physically here, but having them being part of our community so that there is an opportunity for small business owners, entrepreneurs, single mothers, single fathers, to have access to financial tools that will help them protect, grow, and raise their families in a way in dignity and respect that they deserve and they demand to have.
Among the issues, especially for commercial businesses, is fees. I mean, in other words, you want to open up a business account at one of the major banks, they want an enormous amount of money to be deposited in their bank to do that. People just starting out, that is, and it's not like you just have to deposit it once. You've got to keep a minimum balance. Those are the kind of rules, I think, that really X out a lot of people who, in our mom and pop stores that really want to do well, and they don't have a chance.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Gary. And I think it's not only the deck that is stacked against these small businesses as one of the sort of the biggest spenders of money, I guess, as a state government. We haven't really given an opportunity for generations. It's getting better now, but it could be better, to allow MWBEs to access capital like state contracts, right? And that can go directly through the state. That can go through an intermediary that works with the state, like a bank. And again, the reason why this hasn't been happening is because we've had a traditional way of not investing into these communities. So one of the first things that we need to make sure is that, one, I'm committed, and I've already started to engage in these conversations about, these organizations, these trade associations, these banks are going to come knocking on my door, and I've restarted reaching out to the relevant state agencies. That the right conversation that we need to have is, how do we invest into our communities? How do we give my constituents, my neighbors, access to financial tools that help them grow their businesses, protect their families, build liquidity, and also be able to build wealth? Because that's one of the things that helps sustain, support, and make communities thrive. Whether in New York City, whether in Texas, whether in California or anywhere else, I think that's one of the most important things that we need to do and focus on for this next legislative session.
Seems to me this is an opportunity to relook at how we do things, and making it possible or more possible for Bronx small business owners to do well would be one thing. Tell me number one, what you hear from local tenants, and number two, where are they at? Are they going to have to give back all the rent that has been accruing that they haven't paid? I mean, where are we at when it comes to housing, evictions, potential for eviction, and rent, and et cetera?
So this is what we need to do. So first of all, we came back last December to pass an Emergency Protection Act to help tenants stay in their homes during this pandemic, and also try to get access to capital to these small landlords, small mom and pop landlords, so to speak. So what we need to do, and what we need to obviously focus right now, is the aftermath. In last December, we came back to the legislature, and we spoke about, we passed a bill that dealt with emergency protections for tenants and small landlords, right? The mom and pop landlords. With that being said, that was only a first step. And part of the conversations that we've been having had to do is, now that we have a new president, we have a new administration, one of the first things that President Biden did was issue an executive order, basically stemming evictions for the next 100 days, and trying to figure out some support. So we're expecting more help from the federal government to help stymie off evictions. But I think really what we need to do is try to figure out ways in housing law to protect tenants. But also one of the things that we need to do is, well, as we go through these budget exercises, is figure out how to get dollars to tenants and to small landlords, so that the cycle of people being able to pay rent, that money is flowing into the economy, and that we don't slow it down during the downturn that we're experiencing now. So, it's I think there's a lot of things that we can do, and I'm looking forward to working and making sure that happens.
One of the things you mentioned that I was going to follow up with is the whole notion of landlord. If you have a landlord who's running a property and he's not taking in any rent, and we understand why that is, you want to have your water pipes fixed, you want to have proper services in a building, you want to have security, you want to have the door locks fixed. I mean, you could squeeze those guys and women, of course, as much as you want, but the economy's got to work for everybody.
And I agree with that. And I think we're trying to walk the line here, where we want to make sure that tenants have the protection that they need, because ultimately, as the homeless crisis increases exponentially here in the state of New York, at the end of the day, that's going to cost taxpayers even more money and resources, housing folks who are homeless, getting them resources and all this other stuff. At the same token, it's important that the economy is functioning, right? So how do you make sure that that happens? That money is going to, landlords so they can pay taxes, they can fix pipes in buildings, they can deal with the roof repairs and other issues that are occurring in buildings. And I think we can do both. I think it's not a sort of a zero-sum game. I think we can help protect tenants and keep them in their homes, help support small landlords who are going through pretty harsh economic times, and try to figure out a way to do both. And I think that this piece of legislation that we passed back in December does that, but it's only a first step. And now we need help from the federal government that I know that we're going to get. And I know that Majority Leader Schumer is aware of that. I've spoken to him. I've spoken to his staff about this. I know that I've had conversations with my colleagues on the congressional level to talk about this issue, which is absolutely important. So I have confidence that we'll be able to do this, and we'll come out of this stronger and hopefully a lot more prepared. So from the next time this happens.
Culture in the Bronx is so important. We have developed, industries over the music that we create in the Bronx. Yet the city's culture budget for arts and music was cut 70% out of 21 million. It's down to 6 million. Is there a way to understand for legislators the importance of this, and that if you energize young people in the Bronx, especially with their culture, with their music, that will turn out in productivity in this tight time? Can we still find a way to breed Bronx culture?
Well, I think that's incredibly important, because for me personally speaking, as a born and raised Bronxite, I wear my hometown on my sleeve, whether I'm in Buffalo, whether I'm in Israel, whether I'm in Florida, it doesn't matter where I am. When you say immediately, I'm from the Bronx, like that, I don't say I'm from New York, I say from the Bronx. But I think identity is important. Culture is important for someone's sort of how they see the world, how they identify themselves, because it's sort of an important part of a person's aspect. And then also, people can create industries and generate a lot of revenue over this. And, hip hop is a very important and a very good example of this. And, I think cutting these type of programs stymies development for young people and kids. And I think cutting these programs now in such an important time, I think is detrimental to the development and education of our youth right now in the borough.
Assemblyman Victor Pichardo, thank you so much for joining us. We also will thank Senator Gustavo Rivera. We assume you will be back somewhere along the way and tell us how things are going in Albany.
Well, I'll be more than happy to do that. And again, thanks for the opportunity as always, Gary.
Great. Thanks to our great producer, Stephen Powell, and our assistant producer today, Rebecca Hemick. And we'll be back more with Bronx Talk next week, as we always are. Have a good night. Stay safe. Wear your mask. Stay socially distant. Let's all do the right thing.